Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to be checking out the brand new lens from Light Lens Lab. This is the Light Lens Lab 50mm f1.5 Z21. So the Z21 is actually based on a lens that was made in Paris in 1953. So with cinema optics, you have companies like Cooke and Zeiss. Well, there's another company from Paris called Angenieux, and Angenieux built this lens that was called the S21, which was very similar. It was a 50mm f1.5, and if you're familiar with Light Lens Lab, I've reviewed many of their lenses on this channel, and they do incredible things. They essentially rebuild old lenses that are no longer in production, that are very rare, highly sought after. So their very first lens was a recreation of the original Leica 35mm Summicron, the 8-element version. They've also done versions of an extremely rare Leica 50mm Elcan lens, and of course there is the legendary first 50mm Noctilux f1.2. So I have purchased and actually owned several Light Lens Lab lenses, and I love these lenses because of the approach of what they're doing. You know, typically you would go for an older lens, you're looking at collector prices, they're going to be very expensive, and finding them in good condition is also a challenge because of the age. Now, what Light Lens Lab do is they actually do recreations. Now, I know that other companies do this as well. For instance, Leica has their heritage lenses. They've done their version of the 50mm Noctilux f1.2. The difference being is what Leica does with their old lenses is they use modern glass, they use modern coatings, and so you get modern versions of these older designs. It's not good or bad. Some people really like that, but what I love about Light Lens Lab is not only do they use the original glass materials, they use the original coatings, and essentially what you get is a new old lens. In fact, a lot of their manufacturing processes are exactly the same as they were back in the day. The Noctilux has some spherical elements in them, and they actually hand grind them on a machine that they've built, which pretty much is the same as what Leica used. So with these lenses, you're getting a new old lens. You're getting it at much cheaper prices than what you're going to find with collector stuff, and they're in perfect condition. And the other thing that I love about Light Lens Lab is the build quality on these lenses. I own 4 of these lenses, and in every case, the build quality is on par and sometimes exceeds what you see out of Leica today. So for a much cheaper price, you get a really incredible lens, especially if you like vintage optics. The other thing that I'll say about this lens in particular, so the Z21 is actually not an exact replica like the other lenses are. They didn't go off the MTF charts and they didn't get it down to the T. And the reason for that is because they wanted to give you some more benefits out of this lens than what you get with standard vintage lenses. And I'll give you an example. This lens actually will cover the medium format sensors that are used in the Hasselblad cameras as well as the Fujifilm GFX series. And so you get a lot of coverage out of these lenses. It's really impressive for a design that's this old, especially a fast design of 1.5. A lot of times those lenses vignette heavily, not this one. This one will cover a much larger sensor, which is really awesome. So the first thing that you're going to notice when you pick this lens up, it is very lightweight. It comes in at only 313 grams. I love this because it becomes very portable, very easy to carry around. It is not cumbersome. Like the original, this lens uses the classic double Gauss formula of 6 elements in 4 groups, and the focus range is 0.7 meters to infinity, which is pretty standard for Leica M mount. The original version of this lens was available in exact mount as well as M42, but they've done it in M mount. And of course, you can adapt this to any mirrorless camera, and I've used this on a variety of bodies using adapters. I've had no issues whatsoever. Filter diameter comes in at 52 millimeters. It's very small. Also impressive is the aperture system they built on here, and I feel like with a lot of lenses, even newer lenses that come out, this is something that some companies skimp out a little bit on. There's not quite enough blades in here. They're not exactly circular, and so when you start to stop down, your spherical highlights are slightly hexagonal. This is not like that at all. They're using 10 blades that are rounded, and what's really impressive is when you grab the aperture and start to turn it, how smooth this thing is. It is extremely well built, and I can guarantee you that just this build out part of the lens alone probably cost a lot of money and required a lot of R&D on, but it's worth it. It is really awesome. The reason I think this is important is when you consider the original use cases for these lenses and how they were used in the 1950s, you have to remember that back in those days, film was the bottleneck, and film speeds were not that fast. ISO was a big problem, and so when you consider that companies were producing 100 speed films and that was considered high speed, that's usually the base ISO of modern digital cameras, and so people would stop down when they were outside, but when you were in low light, the difference between f2 and let's say f1.5 was really the difference between either getting the shot or not at all. And so it really was important back then. So I tend to stop these down a little bit. Some people love the look wide open that these give, and I'm going to show some image examples in just a second. I actually like it cleaned up just a hair, so I typically don't use this any wider than f2 unless I'm in extreme low light. But it's really cool to be able to stop down. It is so well built, and this lens performs very well in the zone between probably about f2 to f4. You're going to get very sharp sharp images. But of course, the point of this lens is to embrace the aberrations that you had on vintage lenses, and this is why I think it's really interesting what Light Lens Lab are doing. Typically today, you have people who are trained as optical engineers, and their whole job is to get rid of aberrations in glass, not add them in or reproduce them as the way they were in the 1950s. So I think Light Lens Lab are very unique in this respect, and they do an outstanding job with these lenses. All right, I want to take a look at some sample images taken with this lens so you guys can see some of the optical characteristics that you can expect. This first image was taken wide open at f1.5, and you're going to see that the bokeh is very round, very abundant, but it all seems to have these hard edges around the circles, and that's just kind of a characteristic of lenses of this period. Now, if you stop this lens down to f2, you're going to see that it smooths all that out. I think this is really pretty much the sweet spot for this lens. This is where I like to shoot it, f2 to f4ish. You're still going to get plenty of out of focus areas. The bokeh does have a swirling effect that you'll see in a second, and it's really quite nice. And so that's kind of the range that I like to use it in. I'm going to show you another example here. So this was done wide open, f1.5, at the minimum focus distance. And one thing you're going to notice if I zoom into this is you're going to see that we do have some veiling, especially down here with the rope at the bottom of this bottle here. This is fairly common for lenses of this vintage. If you look at a lot of the early Nikon rangefinder examples, even some of the Leicas to an extent, Canon, this is a common thing that you're going to see. And the reason that is because this predates the mechanism where you could have a floating lens element. So lenses that are just built fixed, that don't have that floating element, they can really only be optimized for one focal distance. So typically they were optimized for infinity. So aberrations come into play the closer you get to the object that you're focusing on. So that's fairly common, but you're also going to see that at f2, it sharpens up quite a bit. And really, once you get to f4, you're going to notice that there's no veiling at all. It cleans it up quite nicely. Now, when you start to get past that minimum focus distance, that's where things start to change a little bit. And this lens has a beautiful quality to it. You're going to see it has a very swirly bokeh to it. I love the fact that when you're wide open with this lens is that I wouldn't call it that you're losing sharpness necessarily. You're just losing a lot of resolution. So it does have a little more natural appearance to things, especially when you're shooting this on something like I did here. This is with the Leica M11, so it's a 60 megapixel sensor. So it's not that the lens does not resolve to the sensor. Of course, it's going to give you an image, but it's just a nice, organic, softer image, and I really do prefer that. Of course, if you want to stop it down even further, if you go to f4, f8, it's going to be very sharp. So you get a lot of versatility to this. Of course, most lenses are going to be really sharp once you get to f4, f8, and beyond, and you're not buying this lens to look like other lenses. You're buying it for those unique characteristics wide open, but I think it does a tremendous job. I love the color reproduction on this lens. Colors are very saturated. They're very organic, just like I said with the resolution. It's a really good looking lens. Now, another observation that I want to make about vintage optics such as this is that you have to consider when the time these were made, so 1950s, this was before aspherical elements entered the picture. And today, of course, we have all kinds of exotic glass materials and methods of manufacturing things. Things have completely changed. And so that's when you consider any modern lens that was made in the last 10 years, let's say, they're all really pretty good. And they have very little aberrations. We're able to do things in the way we build and the materials that we actually use now that are very different than they were in the 1950s. Now, as a result, a lot of people you will hear say, and I tend to agree with this, that modern lenses, as good as they are, they have kind of a flat appearance to them. Whereas the depth rendering in these older lenses, it's more natural to me. And they have a really cool look to them. And it's just a matter of choice. Some people prefer a more modern look. Some people prefer a more vintage look. I kind of drift back and forth between them myself, but I really have a soft spot for vintage lenses. Some of my favorites, anything that Light Lens Lab has put out has been excellent. If you've ever shot with old Nikon lenses, old Canon lenses, they all have this really organic feel to them. It's just a cool look, and it's something that I really love. So this is the Light Lens Lab 50mm f1.5 Z21. I think this lens is exceptional. If you like that vintage look, if you're doing cinematography, it can be really cool to enhance the video stuff that you're doing. I love it for stills work. I think this is an awesome lens. One other point that I want to make is I did talk to my contact at Light Lens Lab, and they are testing the waters on this a little bit. And to see if people are interested, if they want to see more focal lengths in this range. I personally would love to see them, like if they did a 75mm or a 35mm, but it's depending on the support that they get on the 50. You guys should check this out. It is quite awesome. I will drop a link if you're interested in the show description below. Would also love to hear what you think, so leave me a comment. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.